Putin. Mutiny. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. I have hitherto provided you with a detailed analysis of Vladimir Putin to help you understand what he is. If you have not embraced that excellent material, I would encourage you to do so, as it will help you understand more about who he is, what he is, and why he behaves in the way that he does, furnishing you with unparalleled information and insight. It also enables you to understand more about the type of individuals similar to Vladimir Putin, often who hold positions of power, far more relevant than the fluffy behaviours of celebrities, even though, of course, most of the world tends to watch in slack-jawed amusement at those celebrities rather than concentrating on the matters that are really fundamental to their existence. But that is the way of the world, and that's why it makes so many people so easy to control. Bread and circuses, etc. Unless you have been spelunking somewhere, you will be aware that on Friday, Wagner mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin accused Russian defense officials of bombing Wagner troops in Ukraine. Then on Saturday morning, things came to a head when Prigozhin announced that his troops, a private army of mercenaries fighting for Russia in Ukraine, would march for justice against the military leadership. They crossed the border from Ukraine into Russia, entering the southern city of Rostov-on-Don. The Kremlin accused Prigozhin of armed rebellion, and in a televised address, Russian President Vladimir Putin pledged to punish those who had betrayed Russia. But later that same Saturday, things took another turn, with Prigozhin calling off the rebellion. The Wagner chief's troops pulled out of Rostov-on-Don, where they had seized the military headquarters. The Kremlin said it would drop criminal charges against Prigozhin, who had been accused of treason. Prigozhin agreed to leave Russia for Belarus, though his whereabouts are currently unknown. Thus, that's a short summary of what went on. It's described as, say, mutiny, but then a rebellion, and even then people started to use the words coup. Russia, of course, has had to deal with coups in the past. In 1991, an attempted military KGB coup against Mikhail Gorbachev lasted only 3 days. The coup plotters lacked the will and the determination to take power into their hands. That failure led eventually to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Back in August 1917, the commander-in-chief of the Russian army, Vladimir, attempted a march on St. Petersburg, which was then Russia's capital city, ostensibly to do this in order to rein in the Bolsheviks and impose government control. His attempted military coup fizzled out, but it did mean that it contributed to the state of affairs that led the Bolsheviks to power that coming November. There then followed a brutal civil war that cost Russia millions of lives. Putin mentioned this 1917 precedent in his address to the Russian people. But what was really going on, and what was the activity here, and how would Vladimir Putin, being the narcissistic psychopath that he is, and having greater categorization, how would he respond to it all? Putin's usual methodology in such circumstances is not to get his hands directly dirty. As the greater, he functions in the rarefied stratosphere, where he's got, in essence, bigger fish to fry. He doesn't need to involve himself in the minutiae. He's not a Chrissy Teigen who feels a slight about her face necessitates going to social media to berate the individual. No. Putin regularly knows about the criticisms that he faces. However, he's busy dealing with other matters and has state apparatus to enforce his will in that regard. And what he does with individuals such as Prigozhin is ordinarily to let the dogs fight amongst themselves. That way, he conserves energy with regard to the necessity of the assertion of control over those individuals. Let them fight it out amongst themselves and then ensure the loyalty and fealty of the eventual winner. He doesn't wade into the fight. He has no need to. The understanding amongst those dogs is that they must only fight amongst themselves, and they must never bite upwards in the hierarchy. This time it would appear, however, that Prigozhin's behaviour is that of biting upwards, which would be seen as a direct threat to control of Putin. However, for all of the West's declarations, or perhaps better expressed, hope and desire that this demonstrates that Putin's grip is weakening, in actual fact, what it really was Prigozhin seeking to make a name for himself. No surprises as to what he is, but witness the selfie-taking behaviour that took place in Rostov. You'd never see Putin engaging in that behaviour. And Prigozhin acted as he did because he wanted to make a name for himself. He wanted to make it look like that he was standing up on behalf of his men. But in essence, his concern was that Putin would endorse Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister. Hitherto, Putin had been somewhat dismissive about that, and he was concerned that this is what would happen, and therefore it was much more about Prigozhin saying, "Hey, look at me," than any credible or serious threat to Putin's leadership. After all, Prigozhin claimed that he had 25,000 men, but Prigozhin is not known for his mathematical prowess, and in actuality had closer to 10,000 men who simply fancied a pleasant ramble to Moscow, stopping off on the way for some coffee. They were never going to mount a serious threat to Putin. Prigozhin knew this, Putin knew this. The fact is, given what Putin is, that away from the facade that he shows the world, he would have found this all rather amusing. Rather than alarmed, he naturally, publicly, condemned it, stating they were stabbing Russia in the back and that there would be unavoidable punishment. He had to project his strong-arm, strongman image and ensure that this mutiny would be smacked down. But it actually provided Putin with an easy opportunity to swat Prigozhin to one side and at the same time defy anybody else who might be getting ideas above their station, to say, he tried to rebel, he was dealt with. Any of you others think that you might do so? Beware. Alexander Lukashenko, as Putin's lieutenant, brokered the deal with Prigozhin, leading to the calling off of the rebellion, and agreeing that he should then go to Belarus. This, despite what the West wants to portray, was not any serious threat to Putin. Indeed, you might almost think that he staged it himself to allow him to demonstrate that he's the main man. It isn't quite in that realm, but it wasn't a serious attempt by Prigozhin, and the canny operator that Putin is, he knew that. He saw it as simple saber-rattling and the banging of pans by Prigozhin because of his own desires to make a name for himself. Rather than be alarmed by this threat to control, Putin took it in his stride and saw the opportunity to nullify it nice and easily, and at the same time sending out a message to the world that he was still in control, and also internally to suggest to anybody that might be getting similar ideas, it's not a good idea, at all. The ease by which Prigozhin was moved to one side underpins the potential risk to anybody else that might be thinking that Putin is losing his grip on power. Accordingly, it was a calculated and disciplined response by Putin that enabled him to avoid bloodshed, retain power, and, of course, make a note to himself about Prigozhin's behavior, who will be dealt with, probably suddenly finding himself falling off the top of a building at some future point. This is demonstrative of the way that a greater, such as Vladimir Putin, would behave. He was able to deal with it promptly, making himself look good into the bargain, and despite the attempts by others to suggest that this shows the weakness of his rule, he will be laughing at any suggestion of that, because he still remains in power. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.